record button until I'm like halfway. Did you hear that too?
Yes, I did.
We are recording. That's something new. It's letting us know.
Mm-hmm.
So hi everybody that's joining us on the webinar. Hello Seth. Hello Sebastian. Welcome. I was talking to Sebastian earlier in the green room. Welcome to virtual Warwicks. We can't wait until he can come back and visit us live in San Diego. I think the last time we was here was for, I think it was for Tribe, wasn't it?
Yeah, I believe.
Yeah. So you're here for Tribe. We had a packed place for that. So we're going to do that again one of these days soon. But next best thing, we've got you virtually coming to us from New York.
That's
So couple little things before we get started as everybody's settling in. This is being recorded, so if you have to step away or if something happens, we'll be putting it onto our YouTube channel, and we'll also put it onto Facebook, so you can go back and see the recording if you missed anything. A little bit about Warwicks. If anybody's joining us from outside of the San Diego area, we are located in La Jolla, San Diego, California. And we are celebrating, my little sign up there says 1896. We are celebrating our 125th anniversary this year. Yeah. So while we are not the oldest bookstore in the country, we are the oldest continuously family-owned bookstore in the country.
Right.
Yeah. So Nancy Warwick, woman-owned, fourth generation owner. So we've got lots of fun things planned coming in the fall. There'll be some fun author things that we'll be doing and some giveaways and some history about Warwick. So keep your eyes peeled for some fun things that'll be happening with that. For tonight's event, I will be putting Sebastian's, but some of you have ordered the book and we will be sending those out to you tomorrow. For those of you that need to get a copy or get another copy for someone, I'll be putting that into the chat function and you can easily click that. Any way you can get a book, you can get it from Warwick's. If you're in the San Diego area, you can choose to pick it up. We'd love to see you in the store, or we can easily ship it to anybody there. Seth and Sebastian are going to chat tonight for about 35-ish minutes, and then we'll do some questions from you in the audience. If you scroll over your screen, you'll see a Q&A function at the bottom there. I think all of us by now are kind of Zoom experts, but if you're not, there is a Q&A button down there at the bottom. Go ahead and put any questions that you have into that function, and Seth will bring those to Sebastian when they are done with their conversation. So with that, I think we've let everybody have time to settle in a little bit, and I will introduce Seth Lerer to you all. So Seth is a distinguished professor of literature at the University of San Diego. It's the University of California, San Diego. Seth, you need to slap me next time you see me. It's like, slap. He is the author of 9 previous books and received the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Truman Capote Prize in Criticism for Children's Literature, A Reader's History from Aesop to Harry Potter. Seth and Sebastian, have a great conversation, and we'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thanks to Warwick's and all of you. I'm going to be introducing Sebastian, and it's my enormous pleasure to be in conversation with him here today through Warwick's. Many of all of us, in fact, will know him from such remarkable bestsellers as The Perfect Storm, from the really challenging and brilliantly incisive film Restrepo, and from his journalism, his first-person reporting, and his documentary work that takes him everywhere from New England through the Middle East. There are many ways of talking about Sebastian Junger. For me, I like to think of him as an anthropologist in so many ways. And in fact, Sebastian and I both graduated from Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, where I know that Sebastian, I believe, majored in cultural anthropology at a time when cultural anthropology was really taking shape as a discipline. And I think that so much of what he's doing in many of his books, his observation of men in groups, relationships of power, and his reflections on Native American culture, military history, local politics, all of this is with not just a brilliant writer's eye, but I think with a brilliant anthropological eye. And what I like to do in many of these conversations, and this was very easy to do with Sebastian's new book, Freedom, is ask myself, what do I underline? Now, there are so many wonderful passages and so many great phrases in this book. It's not just a story but it really is a philosophical meditation. And here's the fulcrum, I think, of the book, when he writes, quote, "The powerful often end up having to negotiate with the weak. And those negotiations invariably revolve around freedom. However it is defined, freedom is due in part to the fact that powerful nations do not always win wars, and powerful men do not always win fights. In fact, as often as not, they lose." And I can think of really no better quotation for our current world in so many ways than this one. And I'm going to invite Sebastian to run with that, if you would. That is, how is this a book about the weak and the strong? How is this a book with this perhaps as a lesson? There are so many scenes in the book when you as an individual are faced with moments of challenge or threat, and that these moments provoke reflections on your part about Native American culture, about the Irish Revolution, about the Greeks and the Montenegrins and the Ottoman Empire. So can we open up with a conversation about the weak and the strong?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you. I was very proud of that passage when I wrote it. So it pleases me enormously that you plucked it from anonymity and read it aloud. So basically, when you're talking about freedom, invariably what you're really referencing is a situation where a less powerful group or person is maintaining their autonomy in the face of a more powerful one. If there were not power imbalances, freedom would not be at issue. But there are in the world, and not only in the human world, but in the animal world. In the world of mammals, in most species, the largest, strongest individual physically dominates everyone else. The largest grizzly bear, the largest walrus, the largest bull, the largest moose, et cetera, the largest mouse. But interestingly, in humans, that's not really true. And what we know from boxing, from mixed martial arts, from generally from the martial arts, is that a smaller individual can actually maintain the possibility of winning against a larger one, and particularly if they're not in a small enclosure. I mean, if a big guy gets into a fight with a small guy in a shower stall, you can pretty much know the outcome, right? There isn't a lot of room to maneuver. But as soon as you give the combatants some room to maneuver, what happens is the smaller adversary is more mobile. They're quicker and more mobile, and the larger adversary, just because big muscles use up a lot of oxygen, the larger adversary gets winded very, very quickly. And that's unique to humans. And it scales up, interestingly, it scales up so that smaller coalitions can often outfight larger coalitions. And that is unique to humans. So you have the Montenegrins who took on the Ottoman army, the Ottoman Empire in the early 1600s. They were outnumbered 12-1. The Ottomans came into Montenegro to make them a vassal state because the Montenegrins were refusing to pay tribute, which was outrageous, right? So the Ottomans marched in and assumed they were just going to decimate these wild mountain people that they outnumbered 12-1. They had artillery, they had cavalry, and what happened? They got their hat handed to them. A third of the Ottomans wound up getting killed, and the rest fled, and that happened over and over again. Fast forward to just recently, the Taliban, who are a regime that I loathe. They have no respect for human rights, for women's rights. They're an awful, awful regime, in my opinion. But you got to give them credit. You know, they didn't have an air force. They don't have artillery. They don't have tanks. A lot of them don't have boots. And they they outlasted the most powerful military force ever assembled in history. That is the United States. And we are leaving now on their terms. And they probably will own Afghanistan within a year or so, if history is any guide. If they weren't able, if the smaller group were not able to defeat the empire, if the empire always won, it would be a lesser world. right? The world would be run by fascist megastates, and for starters, the United States would not exist. We would not have been able to defeat the British Empire in the 1770s. So it's an entirely good thing. It's unique to humans, and it forms the basis of what we consider to be freedom.
That's a great overview. And I would like to use that as a way of getting into the texture of the narrative itself. And that is that the narrative is really about a small group of men. What are you with, 4 or 5, 6 guys?
Yeah, four or five. One guy dropped out, so sometimes there were just 3 of us. It was.
And you're walking the railroad lines in central and western Pennsylvania, which is illegal to do. And I'm wondering how you can put that together with this larger sense about, your small group articulating a sense of freedom, knowing that you're working against this bigger group.
Yeah, I mean, we'd all experienced a fair amount of combat, and we started out with 4 of us. And we walked from Washington, D.C. Up the railroad lines to Philly, and then we turned west. We decided to turn west and go to Pittsburgh. And the railroad lines are this interesting area. There are these swaths of no man's land that crisscross America. It is illegal. There are no cops out there unless they're looking for you, and they were looking for us. There was a helicopter looking for us at one point. Patrol cars. We got into a little situation with a criminal biker gang north of Wilmington, Delaware. We had a guy shot at us in Pennsylvania. It wasn't always friendly out there, but it was wild. And it was wild in this interesting mixed sense. Like we were going through industrial zones and ghettos and junkyards and farms and wilderness. And finally in Pennsylvania, we were in this really beautiful wild area where it was quite easy to find places to sleep, find drinking water. But nighttime usually found us under a bridge or in an abandoned building out in a field. We were drinking out of creeks. We were cooking over fires. Every few days we'd walk into a town and buy food, and they keep going back onto the lines. And over 400 miles or so, most nights we were the only people who knew where we were. As I say in the book, there are many definitions of freedom, but surely that's one of them. It's definitely a gratifying one for us. We had this amazing feeling of being completely sort of autonomous while we coexisted with this behemoth, which is the United States, the mechanized mass society, technology-ridden United States that's booming by at 60 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour. And there we were sort of slipping through in the shadows and existing illegally right under its nose, and nobody caught us. And that was an exhilarating thing to do. We were carrying 60, 70-pound packs. It was very, very hard. We were moving fast. We called ourselves high-speed vagrants. High-speed vagrancy, moved 10, 15, 20 miles a day. And that was how we experienced a certain kind of freedom. And I wove that narrative into the research section of this book.
I know that's what works so beautifully. And to speak of the railroad, you have this great phrase that it was the largest and most ambitious public works project of the industrial area, consumed men almost as fast as steel and timber. Like warfare, building a railroad is crushingly monotonous when it isn't absolutely deadly. How did you weave in the story of the making of the railroad with your own story, and how this is such a uniquely American phenomenon?
Well, one of the things I figured out when I was writing The Perfect Storm, and it really works quite well, just a sort of tip for writers, is if there isn't an obvious, graceful transition, don't attempt any transition at all. Just go from one thing to the next thing, and make sure that the last sentence you wrote of the previous section is a really, really compelling sentence where the reader's like, wow, I can't wait to get back to that. And that the first sentence of the next section is like a killer sentence. You're like, oh, wow, I'll do this for a little while, no problem. So I think, I can't remember exactly how I managed that transition, but I think I just jumped in with both feet and thought I would wow people with just the raw physicality of the railroad environment.
That's it.
It's sort of outrageous what they did in the 1800s, building a railroad across the country, and an unbelievable amount of work. Incredible numbers of people died. I mean, I think 1,000 people died building the Transcontinental Railroad, but they're not even exactly sure because the railroad companies didn't really care. They didn't even bother keeping count of the number of people who died. And then the railroads themselves were very, very dangerous to ride. The first examples of PTSD, when it was sort of first came to public consciousness, it was called railroad spine. They thought it was a nervous disorder that resided in the spine that might have had to do with the shock that the body suffered during railroad accidents. Really what it was civilians, passengers being subjected to unbelievable trauma because the trains would collide with each other and people would be burned alive or boiled alive because of the steam from the locomotive. Or everything would go off a trestle and get piled up in the ravine and then catch fire. I mean, you were just like unbelievably gory accidents that would kill 100 people at a time. And so just for sheer drama, I mean, if you can transfer from one narrative to something that's just unbelievably dramatic, your readers are not going to sort of like berate you for failing a graceful transition. They're not really going to care.
But what I love about this is it's like an alternative mythology to the railroad, right? I mean, the railroad is the American myth in such a positive way. And what you're exposing is not just the negative, but the real contested nature of the railroad in American life.
Yeah, I mean, when the first large railroad networks were starting to be built, they're very controversial, and this is an ongoing debate in America. There was the Secretary of the Treasury, I think it was. I'm not even remembering my own book correctly right now. A gentleman named Gallatin, who was Swiss born, and what he realized is that in America, in the early part of the 1800s, you had this like very sophisticated, affluent, increasingly urban East Coast, right? And then as soon as you got to the front ranges of the Appalachian Mountains, after that, transportation slowed down to a crawl, and it took so much money to get a bushel of wheat, a wagon of wheat from a farm in Western Pennsylvania to market in Philadelphia. That was so costly that basically it cost the same amount to transport it as it was worth at market. And what Gallatin realized is that this amazing country of America, which sort of stretched on to the Pacific for 3,000 miles, if you didn't connect the interior with the eastern seaboard with railroads and canals, then essentially the interior was going to languish, and what could be the most powerful country in the world would be a little sliver of cosmopolitan development, and then this vast hinterland that couldn't move its cargo to port. And so he proposed a railroad system, but no private enterprise could possibly fund that. So he realized it had to be funded and guaranteed by the federal government. And that became, as it might be right now with the infrastructure project being proposed by President Biden, that became a huge bone of contention between liberals and conservatives. Is it really the proper role of government to invest money in enhancing infrastructure? And what they had to do was buy up a huge amount of private land. It forced people to sell because, of course, eminent domain is used to carve out rights of way for infrastructure projects. And at all the inflammatory issues that are 200 years ago that are still current in our debate about what is the role of the federal government and can we literally seize land from private landowners for the public good.
This is exactly right, and this is the frontier narrative. And what's so amazing, I find about the book is that, even though we think of Pennsylvania as a sort of modern industrial, you have found a frontier, as it were, right in our backyards. And so much of this book is about not just the history of the American frontier, but sort of frontier finding in yourself. It is the metaphor for so much here.
Yeah, I mean, we found ourselves in an amazing place, and I didn't realize till later when I started writing the book. I mean, I did this high-speed vagrancy trek without any intention of writing a book. I mean, this was some years ago, and I kept my notebooks because I'm a writer and I write everything down no matter what. And thank God that I did. But so we wound up we passed Harrisburg and crossed the Susquehanna, and we started in the railroad lines went up the Juniata River, which is the only east-west trending river in Pennsylvania. So of course, the railroad lines, as built, followed the settlers' roads, and the settlers' roads followed the Indian trails, and the Indian trails followed the rivers because the rivers carved easy passage through the Appalachian Mountains, the Allegheny Mountains, and so on the railroad lines, we're walking through an ancient thoroughfare that had been used for thousands of years by the natives, and there's something called the fall line. So in all the major rivers on the East Coast, they're navigable by deep water ships. They're navigable up until the first set of waterfalls. And at that point, there's a jumping off spot, usually a city, where after that, things progress very slowly by land, by wagon, by foot, by horse. And so the fall line marks, it's the demarcation between basically East Coast civilization and what was the wilderness, what was called Indian territory. So the Juniata was this gateway. And after Harrisburg, you were on foot and you managed as best you could. And so the settlers that ventured onto the Juniata, which means a Seneca word that means standing stone, because there was a tribe that had this amazing standing stone at the current day town of Huntingdon. It disappeared and no one knows where it went or how they moved it. It was huge. But the settlers found themselves in this very, very dangerous, beautiful, dangerous place of incredible freedom. The government just wasn't there, but it was very, very dangerous. And what I realized, our experience became very wild out there, right? I mean, all of a sudden, we're not in Delaware anymore. We're not quite wilderness, but it's a wild area. What the settlers realized is they escaped the sort of oversight and the tyranny of the government and of the church. But they were in so much danger that they needed each other to survive. And then that meant that they had to abide by the norms of the group. And those norms meant that if there was an Indian attack, everyone had to fight. And if you weren't willing to fight, and if you, as a man, if you didn't carry a weapon at all times, you were cast out of the community. You were not wanted. You were a coward. And so basically there is you could never be completely free, completely safe, and completely comfortable. Your safety and comfort come from the group. And once you're in a group, you have to abide by its norms.
There's a great line in the book which really nails that when you say the willingness to risk death for non-kin is unique to humans. I found that really powerful because it is exactly about the group issue. But also, it becomes almost a kind of moral or ethical thing. And I guess my question is, when do you feel that you have a relationship with others that you're willing to risk death for them?
Well, that's a very good question. And of course, a modern nation of 330 million people formalizes that relationship. And if you join the police force, or if you're a fireman, or if you're a soldier, or in the Coast Guard or National Guard or whatever, you are basically saying, my job, I understand that my job is to risk my life and maybe even give my life.
Yes.
To save fellow citizens that I may not even know. I mean, more than 300 firemen died in the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. Climbing stairs, trying to save people that they didn't know, and that's a formal arrangement in a modern society. We've outsourced those sort of survival tasks, those protective tasks. But for most of human evolution, we lived in groups of 30, 40, 50 people. More complex societies came along after that. But basically, you risk your life for the people that you spend your life with, that you depend on for gathering food and for making shelter. It's the people immediately around you. And I should say the origins of the word freedom are very revealing in this regard. The word freedom comes from the Middle German Vridom, V-R-I-D-O-M. It means beloved. So basically, the understanding was that the people in your cohort, the people in your community, in your tribe, in your clan, in your family, the people that you have, that you consider to be beloved, those people have the right to remain free. You cannot kill or enslave them.
So Yeah. I was gonna
Everybody else
ask.
in the world, yes.
So with the group of men you were traveling with, is that how you all felt about each other? And when in the journey did you feel that way?
Well, what's interesting about humans is that allegiance to other
Mhm.
people can happen very, very quickly. I mean, you can get stuck on an elevator with people, and
Right.
quite quickly, people are willing to collaborate in ways to save everyone's life.
Mhm.
As soon as you're sharing food with someone, as soon as you're facing danger together, facing fatigue together, if you're willing to fall asleep in front of somebody,
Oh,
uh,
I
that's a
like
good
that.
indicator that you trust them. And if you trust them, how could you possibly not risk your life to help them? Because that trust is all we have. It happens very, very quickly. And it can happen at the national level. I mean, I remember after 9/11, George Bush saying this very revealing thing: you're either about the world, you are either with us or you're against us. You're in our group of beloved or you
Mhm.
are not. And so, with us on the last patrol, we was what we called it. We were in, we were all in combat. We knew how to create that connection. We'd experienced it. I would say within, by the end of the first day, we had that relationship with each other.
Okay. I want to move, and that's what interests me. You've got a great line in the book. Women are the final component in defeating a dominant power. And I'm just going to poke it a little bit and say, you write about men. You are an anthropologist of the male imagination in so many ways. And so much of your work is about men in institutional, but also in family or family-like groups. And yet in the middle of this book, here's this line about, women are the final component. And I'm just wondering, I hope you understand where I'm coming from. I'm wondering, sort of where are the women in this, not just in this social world, but in this imaginary world, if you see what I'm getting at.
Yeah, of course. Well, every human society is neatly divided, 50, almost exactly 50-50 between women and men. It's also incidentally neatly divided in its politics, between liberals and conservatives. And I don't, of course, in modern America, but in indigenous societies, there are basically conservative or liberal outlooks that are encoded genetically in our genes, right? So this 50-50 split clearly is very important to maintaining a safe, healthy society, both with our politics and with gender. And so any tribe you want to talk about, the Apache, right? They remained free for 300 years after the Spanish rolled up the much wealthier Pueblo culture. Almost immediately, the Apache, because they were mobile, they're fast on their feet. They could not have done that without women. I mean, it was by definition, it had to involve women.
Mm-hmm.
What I was referring to towards the end of the book is that when it comes to changing society from within, revolutions, labor movements, uprisings, insurrections, those sorts of things, the Easter Rising in Ireland, the labor movement early in the 1900s America. Having women involved do a few things, a few crucial things. First of all, they give a kind of moral legitimacy to what otherwise might just look like a mob of men on the street acting violently. And when you have women involved, everybody knows, everybody believes that there is a moral, that there's a moral issue at stake that has to be at least considered. And that's a huge asset in the sort of political arena, which inevitably these things wind up in. Also, women have lateral social networks. Men tend to have vertical social networks. They tend to function in hierarchies. Hierarchies are incredibly useful when you have to charge machine guns, right? You need a commander and a sub-commander and a whole pyramid of people, and that everyone moves forward because they've been told to. And men do that extremely well, right? What women do very well, and individual women can fight very well in that structure. But what women do on their own very well is create lateral networks, lateral social networks that are sort of like spider webs. And they are very problematic for authorities to penetrate. You cannot just take out the head person and knock out the whole network because it's lateral. And so it's very good at moving information safely. It's very hard for the intelligence services to penetrate. And then finally, the final asset that women bring tactically to an uprising is that even very repressive authorities really think twice before murdering women en masse publicly in the streets. There is a social sanction against it. And so, as one frustrated police captain said during the labor movement, the labor uprisings in Lawrence, Massachusetts, when they finally started putting women on the front lines to confront the soldiers with bayonets, this police captain said, one good cop can handle 10 men, but it takes 10 cops to handle one woman. And that tipped the balance on the streets of the power dynamic during those uprisings.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. And, we're talking about the book, but having these kinds of discussions so resonates with contemporary events, right? So resonates. And, I'm sure that many of people in our group today, we're from a spectrum of political points of view, but I see, the analogy with what you're saying. I mean, how can anyone not think of January 6th in what you're talking about, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And even in the Black Lives Matter, I mean, there was a moment with some of those protests where they did the same thing. They started putting women in the front, and there were women who would confront the police. And I wasn't there, and I'm just guessing, but I bet that the police commander in that moment, confronting women on the front lines, even women with children, carrying children on the front lines, the police commander was like, all right, this is a different dynamic now, and it's a more problematic one. And what are we going to do? Like,
yes,
it's not that they won't use violence, but it presents a tactical problem, and more than that, a public relations problem that sometimes can really boomerang around and cause damage to the authorities.
Yes, there is. We're getting some questions. There is one last thing I'd like to do, and I'm an English professor, right? So that I'm reading this book also stylistically, and this is where I just really want to wrap up. There are so many passages here that read well. I don't know if you have a copy of the book with you.
I don't
Okay.
have my glasses though. I'm sorry. I forgot my glasses.
I'm gonna read a couple of sentences if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
On page 128, and I'm just going to read these sentences. We walked into the town of Derry and ate burgers at a bar top joint named Smitty's. And Smitty himself came out to see what we were about. He saw our dog and our packs and said more rain was coming and that there was an abandoned trailer on the tracks west of town where we could spend the night. A guy in town lost his job and stayed out there all winter. No problem, Smitty said. It's warm now, and I don't believe anyone's out there. Now, that is American realist prose. Okay?
Thank you. Yes.
And, it's Hemingway, it's Sherwood Anderson, it is there's Twain in it. This is, and all I'm asking, from the point of view of me being a teacher and everything, is just to say, are you doing this consciously part of an American realist prose tradition, or is just coming to you out of the experience and giving a kind of vernacular voice to the people you meet?
I've read Hemingway, and I'm sure I've been affected by him. I've read Cormac McCarthy,
that's another great example, sure.
Yeah. So he's, another example. I've never read Sherwood Anderson, but I've read some Twain. So, I've absorbed all these influences. So surely they went into my writer's DNA, and out it comes again. But I can say that I wasn't consciously thinking of those writers. My tastes, and it's a chicken and egg question. Did I read those guys because my taste is like that, or did I develop that taste because I read them? Who knows? But at the end of the day, my taste is for direct, simple, the fewest words possible, and very evocative images. And when and often when I'm taking notes, that's how my notes read. I think I probably copied that paragraph right from my notebook, frankly.
Well, it has that immediacy. That's what I mean. It's voiced. That's where we are. It's immediate. Have you taught creative writing? Have you done workshops? Have you done university or community work with creative writers?
Not really. I have I made a video, a 2-hour video, I think, about how to write well. And I put it on my website, sebastianjunger.com. And I think for 99 cents or something, you can access it. I think I make about $5 a year off it. But if I do say so, I think there's some good advice in there. So you're welcome to check that out. But otherwise, no, I have not.
Okay, so we've got clarity of prose, we have directness, we have the importance of women, we have this, the major line of the railway line is the narrative line, and the whole issue of the frontier. We've been going now for about 35 minutes, and I'm perfectly happy to do some Q&A. I got a chat that came in. We'll also take things on Q&A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a slightly edited version of what I'm reading, okay? And Jay Powell is asking, how do you distinguish between what you experienced and talk about regarding freedom and the license exercised, let's say, by unregulated militias or by attackers? And the question is this a romantic issue? Are we romanticizing freedom here? He's asking, what's the difference between freedom and lack of responsibility? I think that's the core of his question, if you feel like addressing it.
Right. Well, okay. Yes, I do. I do feel like addressing it. It's a complicated question. The nation has been wrestling with that for a long time. An unregulated militia still can't break the law, right? And they cannot take over policing duties. That's the police are there for that. And so, if you want, if people want to arm themselves and walk around in the woods and shoot at things and, whatever, go for it. It's a free country. But what they cannot start doing is acting as if they were law enforcement or, God forbid, overthrowing the U.S. government. And so there is no issue of freedom there. You have the freedom to own a gun and walk around in the woods. Go for it. But that doesn't mean anyone can decide that outside of the courts, outside of all democratic processes, that they just don't like the results of an election and they're going to take matters into their own hands. That is called fascism, right? We have a perfectly good word for taking over a government by force of arms. It's called fascism. And that's obviously the exact opposite of a democracy, and democracy and freedom are not synonymous, but close to it.
Mm-hmm. So as more questions are coming in, I just want to sort of follow up on this, because so much of what, so how can I put this? And again, this is, the English professor in me. The railroad is both, it's free, but it's a track. The railroad is a well-regulated spot of freedom. Yeah. And I just want to hear a little more about this relation. That's really, to me, the core of the Second Amendment, to be honest, is the phrase well-regulated.
Yeah, no, I love that idea. That's brilliant. In a court case in the 1840s called Bloodgood versus Mohawk that I cite in my book, basically the issue was, can eminent domain be used to force people to sell their land to make way for a railroad? And the courts decided that yes, it can, because it was overwhelmingly in the public good, and it was the railroad's ability to, quote, annihilate distance that was so useful to society. But it's the power of the government to do that is very, very constrained by the law. And likewise, the ability of firearms to annihilate life is what makes them useful and what makes them dangerous. And so the government, obviously, in its duty of protecting our lives, is charged with regulating the use of guns. And where that line falls, obviously, is a very volatile political conversation, but the government does have the right to do it. It must, because it's in charge of safeguarding human life in this country.
Exactly. Now, Sebastian, if we were live, we'd be with a group of people, we'd be making eye contact, we'd be, intimidating people into asking questions, would be walking around the room. So right. It's a little, I'm drawing it out here from people. Okay, here's a question. Here's a question. Was the word freedom always the title of the book? Did you sit down and say freedom and then write the book? Or did the title emerge out of the book?
Yes, it was always the title of the book. I had this idea in my mind. Wow, I wrote a book called War. about war. I wrote a book called Tribe about community. I didn't call the book Community because 3 people might buy a book called Community. Tribe is a much more compelling word. And I thought, wow, how cool to write a book called Freedom about this other eternal human value, this other thing that people will die for. They'll die to protect their people, their tribe. They'll die to protect their children, and they will die to preserve their freedom. It's so closely tied to human dignity that people will die for it. And so, yes, the title came first.
Great. Are there other questions? Julie, you're back with us here.
Hello.
Hello.
Are you almost done? So do you have other questions, Seth?
I'm waiting for Sebastian has said so many provocative and exciting things.
Well, but you guys covered so much. It was such a fantastic interview. I mean, it's just
that I hope we can get, if there are a few more questions from the audience.
Yeah, we'll chat for a little bit more and give people a chance to not be shy.
Because as I said, when we're live, you pull it out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But Sebastian, you talked about how you didn't think you were going to write another book, or at the beginning of the conversation, you didn't really have this in mind when you started out.
When I did the walk along the railroad lines, I just did the walk to do the walk. I didn't think I'd write a book about it, but I kept my notebooks, my field notebooks, because that's just what I do. And there they were last year when I started writing this book. There they were sitting there, and offering this sort of amazing material for this book.
Yeah.
Are you going to write a book about family now?
Yeah,
now that you have a family. I'm asking quite seriously.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I don't know. That's it. Probably not. Just because I don't like writing about my personal life too much. But what I think the next thing I'm going to do. I almost died last summer. I came very close to dying. I should have died, actually. And it was a miracle that I didn't. And I had a kind of freak thing happen to me. I had an undiagnosed asymptomatic aneurysm in my pancreatic artery. Wow. And it was a congenital issue that I'd probably had my whole life. And one fine June afternoon, just like I'm talking to you now, all of a sudden some pain shot through my abdomen, and that was the aneurysm rupturing. And I bled out into my abdomen. I within a few minutes, I couldn't stand up. And within 10 minutes, I started to go blind. And it took an hour and a half to get me to the hospital. And by the time I got there, my dead father was sort of floating over me, comforting me. And I'd lost 90% of my blood, 90. They put 10 units of blood into my neck, and they saved me. And I want to write a book. The things that happened to me when I was in that twilight zone between life and death were so odd and so inexplicable, particularly for a good atheist like myself. They were so bizarre and so consistent with other people who have basically died and come back. That my father was a physicist. He was a very rational man, and I want to write a book about what happens that he would respect scientifically.
Beautiful idea.
My mouth is like it's dropping off the floor. It's like I can't wait to even read that. So start writing now.
Yes. Do we have time? There are a couple of more questions.
Yeah, I'm seeing some questions come in. Go for it.
Yeah, it's a great segue into this whole question that Bill Benson is asking about smallpox in the Native American peoples, and and decimation, and sort of the idea of illness as a political issue. I guess that's what I'm abstracting out of here, and I'm wondering, where that comes in this conversation too.
Yeah, well, it's an open question if the Europeans even could have begun to defeat the Native American people of this continent without the aid of disease. I mean, the disease just decimated the native tribes, and the Europeans weren't that much better at warfare. That technology wasn't that much superior to a bow and arrow in the hands of a skilled archer. That it really is it's not necessarily given that the Europeans would have won this fight. And the Iroquois were an incredibly powerful, very well organized society of thousands of warriors, and they had a network that went all the way to the Great Plains, south practically to Florida, all the way up into Canada. They were a really powerful empire, and they were on the verge of creating a sort of half continent wide alliance that might well have repelled the Europeans, except for the effect of smallpox and other diseases. So, it's almost as if the diseases were part of the warfare.
That's really. Do you know Pekka Hamalian's book, Lakota America?
No, I don't.
Oh, it's an amazing book. I mean, this is exactly the argument that there is a very sophisticated political military confederation of Native America in the 18th century.
Absolutely. Yes. Extraordinary. We think of them as sort of Stone Age people, and technologically speaking, they were Stone Age, but they were in their social organization, they were extraordinary.
Yeah, I think that really is amazing. One of the things, we have another question, and I guess that gets back to the very beginning. So why did you decide to take the walk? What was there in your life, or what was there at that moment where you said, I'm going to do this walk?
I'd been in a lot of combat. I had an unsettled mind from that. I had a marriage. I was in a marriage that was failing and ending. I had a good friend and colleague, Tim Hetherington, that I'd made the film Restrepo with, who lost his life covering the civil war in Libya on an assignment that I should have been on. I was supposed to be on. At the last minute, I couldn't go. And he got hit by some shrapnel and bled out. I was grief struck by that. And I just thought, I want to put myself in a different place. I want to get to know my country again, but in the weirdest, rawest way possible.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get to know myself in the rawest way possible. And one day, taking the Amtrak down to Washington, D.C., looking out the window, I was like, damn, I could walk along this whole thing. There's a way to do it. And it looks like nobody's out here. You can have the whole strip to yourself. And so I picked a few hand-picked men, right? And who were willing to do this with me. And, off we went with, and my dog as well, Daisy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, just to wrap up, you're talking about coming to a change in life. And I guess what I'm saying is one of the things that I think readers will get out of this book is also how to rethink, how to change their lives. I'm wondering if you have sort of any kind of direction, or I know you don't want to manipulate what a reader says or control what a reader says, but when we write, we always want something from our readers. And I'm wondering if there's something you want from your readers in this. Do you want readers to feel that nobody's going to go out and do this, right? I mean, that's not the goal of the book,
right?
Is to reproduce this,
right?
But everybody in their own lives has a comparable kind of experience and has their own walking the rails journey version of it.
I would say that the dominant kind of society in the world is a agriculture-based industrial society where large, powerful organizations characterize public life and are the sort of seat of political and economic and legal power. And we've grown accustomed to that and have convinced ourselves that it's, of course, I mean, that's the kind of society that ended up, sort of, quote, winning the competition. So clearly it's the best, right? And the irony is that it's not necessarily the kind of society that gives people the most freedom in important senses of the word. I mean, money gives you a kind of freedom, but being a master of your own time, the way hunter-gatherers were, the way pastoral societies were, is also a form of freedom, right? And so we've become sort of regulated and accustomed to a very, very narrow sense of like affluence and regulated time being what gives us the most free society. And actually, I want people to be more imaginative about truly what kind of freedom they themselves want. And it's possible that being like the Apache, less affluent and more mobile, it is way, way more fulfilling in sort of basic human terms. And what that means for a corporate lawyer, I don't know. But it may require him or her to rethink some assumptions about what is the best way to live the past one's time on this planet.
I think, it's such a wonderful way to wrap up, to say that this book is a provocation to get us to rethink how we want to pass our time on this planet. Sebastian, it's been a wonderful conversation. Very grateful for you taking the time. Julie, thank you so much.
No, Seth, thank you. This was a fantastic conversation. Seth, you always do a fantastic job. Sebastian, thank you for your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's an honor. Seth, thank you for the wonderful questions and all the thought that you put in, and Julie for making this happen. I really can't wait to get out there in person and, meet everybody.
Yeah.
Well, if you start walking now, you should be here in time.
By the fall, we'll see you.
That's right. Yeah.
Thanks a million. Thank you so much.
And when
thank all
when
of
I
you.
close the webinar, we go away, so we don't go back in the green room. So Seth and Sebastian, thank you again.
Thank
and
you
good night,
again.
everybody.
Good night.
Thanks again. Good night.
Good night.